So, you thought just because I had COVID, you wouldn't have to sit through one of my lectures? Well, you're not getting off that easily. Hopefully, by this point, Ms. Wilkinson has already distributed the handouts that go along with this particular slideshow. Um, you will notice on the handouts that I have carefully removed certain words throughout the slides so that you have to pay attention. Um, as I go through each slide, make sure you are filling in the correct word. And if you find you don't have enough space, you can certainly write to the side or in the margins that are available to you. Either way, guys, I'm keeping this relatively short, but this is an overview of some of the more critical information that you'll need to know for Chapter 1 of your textbook and just about government structure in general. Of course, if at any point you have questions, feel free to pause this video and ask Ms. Wilkinson, or you can send me an email and I'll try and provide some clarification for you. Either way, we're going to jump right into it. So make sure you have a pen or a pencil handy as we go through each slide. Now, as we go through the slides, there will be questions that will pop up. I would suggest pausing the video and having a discussion as a class and making sure you know the answers and writing those down as well. But I will continue as if you are pausing, and I will not necessarily give you enough time to get those answers. So make sure you're pausing when you see one of the question slides pop up. So let's jump right into it, guys. This is a presentation put together by a non-governmental group called Civics, whose chief goal is advancing the knowledge of our government and its structures for students. And so they produce a lot of really awesome materials, this slideshow being one of them, but videos and other lessons and activities that help you to understand. So you will see the name Civics pop up throughout the year, as I will often use this resource to help teach you some of the basics of what we look at. Either way, today we're looking at the levels of government, so the basic structure of our government. And I think as far as that structure goes, it's fairly simple for you to remember. And so I'm going to go through it relatively quickly, but we will certainly be reviewing this over the next few days and weeks and months, especially once we get into the civic mirror and you start forming a government of your own. So, I mean, as a background question, asking yourself, what do you know about the structure of government? I think the short answer is you probably know more than you think. You have spent some time looking at this, certainly in grade 6 when you look at democracy, and then through junior high into grade 7 when you look at the history of Canada. You start to look into the historical structure that was created as we descended from the British parliamentary system and created our own country with its own governmental system. And so you're in a pretty good position to understand some of the key ideas here. But again, if you don't get them all today, don't stress because we will talk about this stuff a lot. So when we refer to government, we like to talk about the levels of government. And so I want you to picture levels kind of like a hierarchy. The highest level is like the biggest chunk. It's like a triangle upside down. The highest level governs our entire country. So when we're looking at the map of Canada, the federal government is the highest level, and it's in charge of decisions that affect the entire country. We have provincial territorial governments that are responsible for their individual jurisdiction, whether that's British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, etc. Territorial governments, of course, would be in charge of the 3 northern territories. Really, the only main difference is that they're slightly smaller in their scope of responsibilities, but we won't talk too much about that. And then finally, municipal governments that are responsible for individual cities or municipalities. And again, we'll talk more about the distinction between those things. A final form of government we have across the country is indigenous governments, wherein own reserves or bands across our country will have jurisdiction over their own territories. There are some specific rules about those and how they work, and again, that's something we'll talk about over the year. The important thing is that you know these different levels exist. Again, federal for the whole country, provincial for a smaller area, municipal for a specific area, and indigenous governments for individual reserves and tribes. So each one of those levels has a unique set of responsibilities that applies to the level of government. And we're going to go into a little bit of detail of that in the next little bit. The level of government we deal with primarily in grade 9 social studies is the federal government. Okay, so the federal government is the one that represents us as a nation. Okay, across the country, we have elections periodically, at least every 4 years, where we elect members of parliament. So a member of parliament is someone who represents us at the federal level. You'll notice on this slide that there are 338 elected MPs. Each one of those people represents a different part of our country. Okay, so for example, Calgary is divided into 10 ridings. Each one of those ridings elects a different member of parliament. Okay? Same goes for countries across, areas across the city, or across the country. The more populous the area, the more members of parliament will have to represent the area. Okay, so for example, a city will have many members of parliament, but a large rural area, for example, northern Alberta, may only have one member of parliament. So it's not based on size, it's based on population. So relatively speaking, each riding is roughly the same in terms of the number of Canadian citizens that lives in that riding. Okay. These members of parliament all form a body called the House of Commons, which is responsible for creating and enacting laws that govern our country. Okay, so again, our federal government would identify an issue, would see the need to address that issue, and would try to create laws that would resolve the issue or speed it along. The leader of the government, and again, we'll get more into these details as we go, is called the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is simply the leader of the political party that has the most elected members of Parliament in the House of Commons. So, for example, in the current government, the Liberal Party, which is a group of people who shares the same set of ideas about how to run the country, the Liberal Party has the most seats in the House of Commons, more than any other political party, and so their leader, Justin Trudeau, becomes the Prime Minister. And that leads us right into our next question. I literally just gave this answer, so hopefully in your head you know who your current Prime Minister is. But if you weren't listening, it's Justin Trudeau. As for who your MP is, during your government web quest, you would have looked that up. Now, the neat thing about our school is we're actually right in the middle of dividing lines between ridings, federal ridings. And so if you are on the east side of Sarcee Trail, which is where we live, you are in one riding and would have a member of parliament representing you. If you are west of the Sarcee Trail, you would have a different member of parliament representing your area. Now, hopefully you look those up because I don't have them written on down off the top of my head, but you should be able to find that information, and you should have found that in your web quest that you completed last week. And now that I've said that, I do have the map. So if you are west of Sarcee Trail, you're in Calgary Signal Hill. If you are east of Sarcee Trail, you're likely in Calgary Centre. Some of you may live in Calgary Heritage, depending on where your house is located. And remember, each of those areas will have a different member of parliament. All right? I'm actually going to pull up a map here quickly just to give you guys a representation of that. So if I look at Calgary federal ridings, and I just pull up the first image that kind of pops up, you'll see that Calgary is divided into each of these different ridings. So again, the school is right about there, right? So those of you who live immediately around the school are in Calgary Centre. Those of you who are west are in Calgary Signal Hill. Now, if we look at Alberta federal ride, oh, good spelling, Mr. Pratt. Wow, nailed it. Thank you for autocorrect. if I look at the map of Alberta based on, you'll notice that like while Calgary has a bunch of ridings in it, you just saw Calgary has like 10 ridings, you'll notice that these rural areas are enormous. Okay, so these are much larger areas, but they only have one member of parliament. So again, that idea of population that I brought up earlier, right? So same thing would apply. Edmonton has multiple ridings in it. Red Deer would have the same. Some of the smaller cities would each have a member of parliament, Medicine Hat, Lethbridge, etc. All right, back to our PowerPoint here, which I should be able to find. There we go. So that's our federal level, and again, we'll talk in way more detail about that, the elections, all those sorts of fun things. The next level down is the provincial government. And the provincial government works in much the same way. We elect representatives, depending on our geographical area, to a body called the Legislative Assembly. It's up in Edmonton. You can see a lovely picture of it right here in the background. That's the University of Alberta. That's where I went to school. Yay. The provincial legislative body has 87 MLAs from across the province. MLAs do the same thing as the federal government. They debate and pass laws at the Legislative Assembly in Edmonton. Again, they would address issues that affect specifically Alberta and try and pass legislation to deal with those issues. And the leader of that particular government is called the Premier. Now, again, the Premier works the same way as the federal leader. The Premier is the leader of the political party who has the most seats in the legislature. In this case, it's the United Conservative Party's leader. I'm not going to give away that answer because I believe that's the next slide. So, our current Premier, of course, it's currently Jason Kenney, although you may be aware that we are in a leadership runoff right now, an election. The United Conservative Party is picking a new leader ahead of next spring's election. And so that new leader will become our Premier until the election in the spring, at which point different parties will be vying for control of the legislature. Again, we're going to talk more about like what control means and how that's going to look as we move forward. But short story for you is the different parties, the New Democrats specifically, and the United Conservative Party are going to be battling for who gets to make the decisions on behalf of Albertans. As for who your MLA is, again, it's the same thing with the federal. It really depends on where you live relative to the school. Our school is in a divided area, and so you would find a similar thing if we looked at a map of Alberta's provincial ridings. The final level of government that we are going to look at here is the municipal government. And so the municipal government is the level of government that specifically deals with the city. People who represent us at the municipal level are called councillors, specifically in Calgary. They used to use the term alderman, but some found that to be too gender specific. And so in Calgary, we've reverted to the term councillor. So councillors represent different areas called wards. Okay, our city is broken into wards. Each councillor represents a ward at city council. Now, unlike, so I've used that term ward. In the federal, we call a geographical voting area a riding. At the provincial level, we call it a riding. At the municipal level, we call it a ward. W-A-R-D. So municipal councils are in charge of doing the same thing as the provincial and the federal ones do, which is passing laws at the local or city town hall level. The head of that council is called a mayor, or in more rural areas is sometimes referred to as a reeve. And the size of the structure of the council differs depending on the population. So, of course, Calgary has multiple councillors. I believe it's 16 councillors to represent the city, whereas a more rural area may have a much smaller council making decisions. So, our current mayor, give you a second, is Jyoti Gondek. She was elected last fall in a pretty significant election, replacing our previous long-term mayor, Naheed Nenshi. As far as the head of the local council, we would refer to that as the mayor. Now you have a different councillor, and once again, this one's even more confusing because the dividing line for wards is actually at 37th Street and Richmond Road. So you could live in like 3 different wards, I think, depending on where you live relative to the school. If we looked at the map of the wards for the city of Calgary, which again you may choose to do. Um, as far as our government structure goes, there's also several positions called that we appoint, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means. Canada is actually called a constitutional monarchy, which sounds really confusing, but what it essentially means is the head of our state, which is a ceremonial position, is a monarch. In our case, a hereditary sovereign, a king or a queen who reigns in accordance with a constitution, which is like a rule book that government must follow. Now, in Canada, the monarchy would have had way more significant of a role in the past, but right now it's largely ceremonial. Of course, you're probably aware that our most recent monarch, the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, very recently passed away and has been succeeded on the throne by her son, King Charles, who is now our head of state in Canada. Now, of course, they've got their own business to attend to over in Britain, so they're not really paying much attention to us. And so the sovereign in Canada is represented by somebody named the Governor General, whose job it is to essentially do the Queen's work in Canada. So they would attend the House of Commons, they would take on ceremonial roles at events across the country, and they also do something that's called royal assent. But we're going to talk about that when we talk about the law-making process later this month. The King is also represented by somebody called the Lieutenant Governor at the provincial level. The Governor General selects that person on the advice of the Prime Minister. And so these people have those roles for 5-year terms. And there's not a similar role at the municipal level. So when you hear Governor General or Lieutenant Governor, just remember those are representatives of the monarch here in Canada as well as in Alberta specifically. I'll give you a moment to look at those. I know you guys looked up. You actually see this. Do you know the new Governor General who will take office later this fall? This is a year old. Of course, our new Governor General just took over for our previous one, a lady named Julie Payette, and Mary Simon was the one who took over. So the current Lieutenant Governor in Alberta is someone named Salma Lakhani, who recently took over. She is the first South Asian or Muslim person in Canadian history to hold that particular role. So one important thing when we talk about levels of government, and the reason we have levels of government is for this thing called divisions of powers. Essentially, the idea is that the federal government has things on their plate that are going to keep them busy. And so dealing with something very small at the municipal level would be quite difficult for them. So in large part, we want to make sure that each level of government is focusing on the jobs that matter most to the people that they are in charge of. So we have assigned specific responsibilities to each level of government. This division is what we refer to as division of powers, meaning the government level closest to the issue is the one that governs it. Let me give you an example. Our municipal government deals with building regulations. So, for example, if you wanted to tear down your house and build an apartment, it would be the municipal government who would be making that decision for you of whether that was allowed or not. It would be of no value for somebody in the federal government in Ottawa to be making a decision at that level. They don't know the specifics of Calgary. They don't know about our neighborhoods or building codes, and so it would be largely an inefficient use of government. Likewise, we don't want somebody at the municipal level making decisions about, say, national defense. Should we enter into an international agreement with this country? Should we be trading with that country? Again, somebody at the municipal level making that decision would be ignoring the needs of all Canadians. So we want to find the form of government that makes the best possible decision. I guess if you look at it in the context of a school, right, you wouldn't want a teacher from a completely different classroom deciding what was homework for our classroom. I'm going to make that decision because I have the best knowledge of the issue based on my presence in the classroom. And it would be the same thing with government. The government that is closest to the issue is the one making the decision for the most part. So, examples of different responsibilities, you don't need to memorize these. Of course, some of them will come up repeatedly. A couple I will point out, of course, is that the federal government is in charge of course, global affairs, our relationships with other countries, as well as another one we deal with this year, which is immigration and citizenship. We will talk quite heavily about that once we get to Chapter 5 sometime in the new year. Provincially, maybe the most important ones are education and healthcare. Um, and again, we'll talk more about why the provinces are in charge of those particular items, but those are the responsibilities you should certainly attach to the province when you think about what provinces are in charge of. And then finally, the municipal government, of course, I've already mentioned, like local building, like roads and sidewalks, like where do we put new neighborhoods, who pays for that, who picks up the garbage, who puts out the fires, who polices crime in the area. Municipal governments are in charge of things like that. So this is a really good question, and I just want you to think about it. It's a rhetorical one. You guys can have discussion about it as a class. I certainly encourage that, but I'm not expecting you to write down an answer for me. But when you think about what level of government has the greatest impact on your daily life, I will tell you as an adult, it's taken me a long time to formulate an opinion on a question like this because I think you need the life experience and you need to understand what governments do before you can understand how they impact you. But let me give you an example. Let's suppose our provincial government decides that they want to address post-secondary education and they want to improve access to it. So they pass a law putting a cap on the price of tuition at the university level. Well, how does that impact you? You're in grade 9. You might be going to post secondary in 3 years. This law that's been put into place is going to save you a lot of money, right? That's a benefit to you. Likewise, if the opposite happens and the government decides, well, this is a market commodity, people will pay what they feel the value is, and they take away any cap on cost for university, suddenly that price could skyrocket to the point that maybe you're not able to afford it. And I don't need to explain to you that impact that could have on your future, right? So knowing what the government's responsible for and what impact it's going to have on you is really crucial. I know you don't care if Canada has a ceremonial contact with the government in Nepal, okay? But gaining an understanding of where the government does impact you is going to be a crucial part of this year, right? Because it will impact you whether you care about it or not. Again, Miss Wilkinson could pause the video here and go on a rant about all the different ways as an adult the government decisions impact her. It's probably best that I'm not there today because I could definitely go on some rants and that's not a good idea. I'm supposed to remain neutral. So, and as far as knowing why it's important who our local representative is, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal, knowing what party that representative represents is crucial to understanding what kind of voice they are giving you at the City Hall, at the legislature, and at the Parliament building in Ottawa, right? Somebody from the Liberal Party is going to have a different opinion and way of doing things than somebody from the Conservative Party, right? And again, we'll talk about what those mean and what those look like. Seems like I've been doing a lot of talking, and so I'm actually going to stop right there because the rest of the information in this is not crucial for us right now. It is stuff we will talk about moving forward. So again, if any questions came up as we went through these slides, please make sure you write them down after I'm done talking, and you can ask me when I am back, hopefully on Thursday or Friday this week. Either way, thank you so much for paying attention, and now that I've done all this, I guess you probably have some work to do. So over to you, Miss Wilkinson. Thank you, everybody.